Okay, so this video, the title is "The One Thing I Changed That Helped Me Catch More Fish," and I really believe this. So I'm going to tell a story. So um, it was a really hot summer day, like 95, 98, and it was in the middle of a hot spell. And I went fishing. I caught a few dinks here and there, and I pull up to this one hole and shaded deep by some wood. And sure enough, they were stacked in there. And I was fishing like a small swim bait with an underspin, hooked weedless. But I had the hook pretty well exposed. It wasn't like I had it really buried deep. So, anyways, I cast right in the spot, make the perfect cast. Boom, hook into a nice one, probably 17, 18 incher. And he came off right at the bank. I was like, oh man. Next cast, I cast the same cast. I hook into about an 18 incher and I landed him. And I was like, okay, thank goodness, I redeemed myself. Because, for me, if I catch one that's like a 17, 18 incher, that's no matter what happens the rest of the day, you catch one real nice one like that, it's a good day. Anyway, so I kept casting in that same spot and they were stacked. I hooked in total, including those two, I hooked into 6 fish and they were all 16 inches or above, mostly 16, 17 inch in that range. I caught 3 and I lost 3. And what was happening is I was casting and I was kind of like swinging it, like casting it to this hole and letting it drop. I would reel my slack up and then there would be weight and they were on there. They're just hitting it on the fall. And, but they were kind of swinging toward me. And so what I realized is I wasn't getting good hook sets on them. And this goes into how I changed what I'm doing. I was using monofilament fishing line on a spinning rod. And that was the day where I was like, I'm not losing. I'm not going to bat 50% of hookups when I'm casting a jig down. I should be landing 90% of those fish. So I watched some videos. I watched a specific video by Nathan Quinn's Fishing. His channel is awesome. Basically saying like, yo, you need to switch to braided line because there's less stretch. There's all these benefits. So I decided to make the switch. The next time I went out, I caught a 20-inch smallmouth on braided fluorocarbon leader is my personal best smallmouth. And I'm really glad I switched up because that was the next trip I caught that one. It's funny, later, a few weeks later, I went fishing with my oldest son. This was this is kind of fall, like late October. And he was using that same rod. And he was actually using that underspin with the spinning rod. And he caught some nice fish, but he lost 2 big ones that day on mono. And I just didn't know, I just didn't have braid hooked up on his rod. So I'm going to make sure that he gets braid or at least pure fluorocarbon. So, okay, so what do you do? Well, I've been using 15-pound braid, and then I use a fluorocarbon leader. I use 8-pound. I don't really think it matters that much. I think you could use 10. I think you could use 12, unless you're fishing like super, super clear water. I know some guys fish like 6-pound fluoro leaders. For me, the water's not like hyper clear, so I would even say use whatever you have. So for example, I have this is Seaguar Invisex. This is like really good fluoro. It's 12-pound, and of course you buy a 200-yard spool, which is like plenty to fill up a reel, but not enough to fill up 2 reels, right? So this is probably what I'm going to use this summer for leader. Is I'm going to fill up a reel with this, probably put 150 yards, 160 yards on a bait caster. I think I'm going to put it on my one of my bait cast combos. And then I'll have a spool of 40 yards of really good high quality leader that I'm going to use. Because fluorocarbon's not cheap, it's not cheap. So the connection, that was one of the things that scared me the most, is like I have to tie this new knot that I don't know that I trust connecting these two things together. And I started tying the double uni knot. There are some people like Randy Blockett, if you're listening to him, he's like, don't ever tie fluorocarbon to braid. And I'm like, okay, like 99% of pros do this. Also, Richard, if you want to talk about old school fishermen, Richard Jean, the fishing machine, he uses the double uni knot. There are other knots. The FG knot is like supposed to be the best. The Alberto knot is one. But the double unis worked fine for me. The first time I switched to braid and tied a double uni knot, I caught a 20-inch smallmouth. And so like if there was ever a time to test, like that first time I went out, I'm like, I hope I hook like a 15-incher just so I can like set the hook and make sure this I tied this knot right. And I must have tied it right because it held up for a 20-inch smallmouth. So what I do, to be honest with you, is I do this at work. I have a couple spools of line, and let's see here, where's that knot? There it is. So there's a uni knot. I'll link a really good YouTube video. There it is against my forehead. There's a really good video I found that I learned to tie it. And then what I started doing was, I've been doing over the winter, is once a day, I just come in here, I cut this knot, and I just tie one. I just tie one every day on those two spools I keep in my desk at work, just so I become super, super familiar with it. You know, like even when I started fishing, there was times where I was like, man, maybe I should just fish like pure fluoro on my spinning rod, or mono, just because what if that leader breaks? I don't want to have to tie a leader. And then I was like, that's clown behavior. Like, what are you doing? Just like get good at the knot so that if for whatever reason you lose your leader, you can sit down on the bank and in 2 minutes, boom, tie yourself on a new leader. So I'll link a good video in the description for the double uni knot. Again, I don't think it's rocket science. Obviously, you want your leader to be a lower pound test than your braid. That way you're breaking, hopefully breaking at the lure, not at the knot connection. The other thing I do is, so when I tie, I like to have a leader that's basically about the same length as my rod. So if I'm using a 7-foot rod, I make a 7-foot leader. The reason for that is I don't want that knot, when I reel my lure up to the tip, I don't want the knot going into the roller here, because I feel like that would probably fray up the knot. So you want it to where you're not like, if you reeled your lure all the way up to the tip, that your knot's like right here, like an inch above the roller. And what I do is I connect them. I don't even disconnect the, I just leave, once I tie my braid main line from my rod to my leader, I leave it on the spool. Then I measure out like a little bit more than the length of my rod, and then I'll reel it down and see where it's at. Because you can always trim back and make your leader shorter, you just can't make it longer. So I make it as long as I can. So again, basically the length of the rod. So if it's a 7-foot rod, you have about a 7-foot leader, which seems to work just fine. So why braid? Well, there's a few huge benefits. One is there's no stretch, going back to why I lost those fish. I probably had a big belly in my line from the mono, and when you set the hook on mono, you have all this stretch, which means less pressure on the hook penetrating the fish's mouth. So using braid, you get better hook sets. Also, braid, you can have higher visibility on your line. So like a lot of guys use like Suffix 832, which is like a high vis green, to where if you're fishing like a soft plastic, you can almost see your line, like you can see it move and pick up your slack and set the hook. So it's almost like a strike indicator, kind of like how fly fishermen use indicators in our fly line. I've been using like yellow braid. It fades and turns white, but I can see it pretty well. I don't know much about like why one braid is that much better than the other. I do know that fluorocarbon strength is something, so I tend to spend my money more on the fluorocarbon than on the braid itself. So I would probably say, I mean, 15-pound braid is so thin that you can cast 15-pound braid on a spinning reel probably easily better than you can cast 8-pound fluorocarbon or monofilament on a spinning reel. So like, even if you want to go up to 20, you're probably fine. I think 15 is like just a good overall size, but you could probably go 20. You could go lighter if you want to cast super far. I don't need to cast super far. I've never had a situation for me in my fishing conditions where I feel like I'm not casting far enough with 15 that would make me drop down to like 12 or 10-pound braid. So yeah, so since I switched, catching a lot more fish. Double uni knot's great, or look up videos for Alberto knot or the FG knot. Yeah, you're just gonna lose a lot less fish because you can get better hook sets. The other thing I will tell you is set your drag a little bit looser, because you get to think there's kind of like a cushion point with monofilaments. So like if a fish is pulling, it's gonna pull a certain distance and stretch, and then it's gonna engage the drag. The drag will start pulling line. But with braid, you don't have the stretch, so you want to have it a little bit looser. You probably notice a lot of times when you're hearing guys on TV catching fish with braid, you hear like their reel's almost constantly just ticking a little bit, tink, 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 as they're reeling. You wouldn't have that with mono because you'd just be having the stretch. But with braid, you have to set it a little bit looser. So yeah, so that is a big tip, I would say. If you're like me, I fished my whole life with monofilament line. I went through periods of time where I fished less than others. And as I've been getting real serious into catching smallmouth, I'm like, I need to do everything I can. I think in terms of my tackle, that is probably the biggest thing that has caused a significant improvement in my catch rate. So thank you so much.